Buy, sell, or hold Week 13 fantasy trades with a little bit of a twist. As we close out the fantasy season, a lot of you are closing in on trade deadlines. So this week, I'm giving you 3 sets of 3 players. What moves should you make as we head into that final stretch before the fantasy playoffs? For our first set here, we are buying Saquon Barkley. The Eagles lost in Week 12, but the pass game looked fantastic. Jalen Hurts completed 27 of 39 attempts for 289 yards and a touchdown. The touchdowns on the ground both went to Jalen Hurts, meaning that Saquon Barkley was the biggest loser in this game. He had just 10 carries for 22 yards. He was saved by 7 receptions for 52 yards. But the last time that we saw him have an actual ceiling game was way back in Week 8 against the Giants. Outside of that, it has been fairly mediocre production, absolutely not what anyone was expecting for where they drafted Saquon Barkley. In the past 3 games for Barkley, they have been RB20 or worse. So why are we buying him here? Well, to be fair, the matchups have been bad matchups. Dallas, their run defense has clearly improved. Detroit has always had a fantastic run defense this season. And then before that, it was Green Bay, a Green Bay defense that can be very stout against the run. But looking ahead, we have got a great matchup against Chicago. Then there's a matchup against the Chargers, who aren't necessarily easy against the run, but if you're going to attack them, you definitely want to do it on the ground. Then you have a mediocre Vegas defense, followed by Washington and Buffalo. Very good run matchups there for Barkley. So at this point, fantasy managers are extremely frustrated with Barkley. This is literally potentially the perfect time right before the trade deadline to just swoop in there and grab him on the cheap. We are selling DJ Moore. DJ Moore is essentially the snip, snap version of the NFL. Are we in? Are we out? Will we get 20 fantasy points? Will we get 0 fantasy points? DJ Moore has been a sell for me all season. Full disclosure on that, just because the mediocre production that he was having was extremely frustrating. Through the first 8 weeks of the season, his range was essentially between 7 and 12 fantasy points in full PPR. But now he's actually turned into an extremely boom-bust player. And while boom-bust is actually more appealing than pure mediocrity, we still have some major problems. Again, I don't hate a high ceiling, low floor player, because at the end of the day, if you make me choose between someone that's going to give you a solid 8 fantasy points on a good day and someone who can realistically win you your week, I'll lean towards the one that can win you the week every time, even if they can absolutely destroy it. But the problem here is that boom, bust, it has become very specific here for DJ Moore. And you can't help but notice that it's happened in the past 4 matchups here that have been Cincinnati, the Giants, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh. Those are all games that naturally induce boom games because their defenses are so inconsistent against the pass. So I am not shocked that he naturally turned into someone that would have an extremely high ceiling and a low floor. But the matchups moving forward, they're not something that we really want to mess with here. These are not boom games here. It's Philadelphia, Green Bay, Cleveland, Green Bay, and then some reprieve in Week 17 against San Francisco. So aside from Week 17, absolutely none of those matchups are appealing to me in any way, shape, or form for DJ Moore. While I do think these will be matchups where we do see decent pass volume for Caleb Williams, I'm not completely out on that because these are also bad run matchups as well. I simply don't trust it for DJ Moore. This is a great opportunity to try to pivot off of DJ Moore at the last minute rather than having to deal with what will likely be a naturally lowered floor to close out the season. And for our hold here, we are holding on TreVeyon Henderson. Ramondre Stevenson returned, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is that TreVeyon Henderson was a clear lead back still. He had 18 carries for 66 yards, and he had 3 receptions for 15 yards. Obviously, it was good to see him retain that role, but this was a massive letdown after he had ascended into greatness in the previous 2 games. We also had the little issue of the Patriots doing exactly what we kind of expected they would do, going right back to Ramondre Stevenson as the goal line back, but there is a glimmer of hope. Stevenson failed at the goal line miserably. Logic would say that the Patriots gave Stevenson a go, it didn't work, and they should remember all of those happy times that they have with TreVeyon Henderson and that he also can be a very effective goal line back there. Regardless, there was a very clear continuation of him as the lead back, and that is really the key here of why we're holding here with this remaining schedule. It's the Giants, followed by a bye week, then Buffalo, Baltimore, the Jets. Buffalo is the toughest defense that Henderson will face on the ground. But the good news is that defense is actually allowing some solid receiving work to running backs, so he can still win from a fantasy perspective that way. The only real issue that we have here is the bye weeks, so unless you're truly in a dire situation where you cannot afford to be without him during that bye week, you gotta hold here for his potential. On to our second sit here for our buy. We are buying Michael Pittman. I have talked about Michael Pittman as a buy low multiple times this season, and the reasoning has always been perception. The perception of Michael Pittman versus his actual output is never aligned. I am a Michael Pittman defender until the end of time here, but people simply don't see him as a true wide receiver one. And he is ranked as a low-end wide receiver 2 in rest of season rankings, despite the fact that he is literally wide receiver 10 in average fantasy points per game in PPR on the season. Now, there have been a couple of disappearing acts from Pittman, but I feel like people judge him too harshly for it because aside from like a Puka Nacua, every wide receiver one disappears every now and then. And it's been in kind of odd matchups that don't make you feel it was just matchup based rather than just the weird instance of Daniel Jones pivoting to someone else. It was against Arizona and Atlanta where he had dud games, and he had one below average-ish game against Denver, which was actually, from a fantasy perspective, perfectly in line with what you often see against Denver. Outside of that, he has had a minimum of 13 fantasy points in every game this season, aside from those 3 games. We have to put bias aside here and realize that the man is having a career year and has become a touchdown magnet here. And quite frankly, just in general, the only 2 seasons where he has not been a steady wide receiver 2 were his rookie season and last year where he had the QB disasters and also was playing through a pretty significant back injury. He is a career top 24 receiver that is truly having a true wide receiver 1 season, and we can still buy him for pennies on the dollar because people love Alec Pierce and Josh Downs. Now we are selling on Lad McConkey. Now, there's no issue for Lad McConkey, but if your quarterback has an offensive line issue and quite literally can't get you the ball, that is a major issue for you. The Chargers are coming off a bye week, but prior to that, they had 2 absolute layup matchups. Justin Herbert should have gone off. Pittsburgh and Jacksonville. Against Pittsburgh, mediocre day. Herbert had just 220 passing yards, 1 touchdown. Good thing is that at least half of that volume did go to Lad McConkey, so he didn't have a bad day. We want to see him with more volume, but he did have 4 receptions on 6 targets for 107 yards and a touchdown. But against Jacksonville, everything just fell apart completely. The offensive line was done. Justin Herbert had just 81 yards, no touchdowns, an interception. Lad McConkey really struggled. Just 3 receptions on 4 targets for 13 yards. Point blank, if the offensive line cannot protect Justin Herbert, he just can't get the ball to his receivers. Now, here's the kicker. This week is a good start where I can get on board with Justin Herbert and Lad McConkey, quite frankly. This could go 2 ways, right? We could see Max Crosby absolutely go off and take advantage of that Chargers offensive line, having a miserable day there without Joe Alt. Or Vegas, because they are a legitimately awful team, Justin Herbert could still have an excellent day. Lad McConkey could go off. It could be wonderful. And we're like, yay, we have no problems. The offensive line is not an issue. But that's just against Vegas. It's the upcoming matchups that we're concerned about. They can get past Vegas. That's not the issue. After that, they face Philadelphia, Kansas City, Dallas, and Houston. By the time they reach Dallas, again, this could be a far more cohesive unit with all of their new pieces, meaning that the rest of season schedule is legitimately awful, possibly the worst for anyone. Now, you don't have to panic sell Lad McConkey because at the end of the day, he's still the clear wide receiver 1 in the offense. But if you have the ability to get out of it right now for fair value, probably a good idea. And for our hold, we are holding on Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle is coming off a bye week, but prior to that, he had literally the worst performance since becoming the Dolphins' wide receiver 1 after Tyreek Hill's injury. Outside of that nightmare game that we are not counting against Cleveland, where the wind was apparently so bad that neither quarterback could throw more than 3 yards beyond the line to scrimmage, so we kind of put that away to the side there. So in week 12, that is objectively the worst fair performance that he had. 3 receptions on 7 targets for 52 yards. It's not that bad. He is an absolute hold. He has been extremely reliable in general this season. Even before Tyreek Hill's injury, he had strong fantasy performances. And since the injury to Tyreek Hill, if you exclude that game against Cleveland, he has finished between wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 37, with the wide receiver 37 performance being that week 11 performance. He's had 4 top 20 finishes. Week 11 was just his floor. In Miami's early season schedule, it was a bit tilted, right? As a matter of fact, there was not a single layup matchup early in their season, but the back half here far more favorable. So I'm not surprised that Miami is turning things around a little bit here. We've got upcoming matchups against New Orleans, the Jets, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay. Waddle could literally be a league-winning asset. You don't want to get rid of him now. This matchup against New Orleans will be the most difficult remaining here, and then it is very pass-friendly rest of season. Now on to our final buy, sell, hold. We're buying Chris Olave. Yeah, hear me out on this one. We are buying Chris Olave. The combination of Tyler Shuck and Chris Olave, it's not that bad. I'm kind of in. Just don't tell anybody. I'm kind of in on it. Like, I'm not in on Tyler Shuck, but I am in on the combination here, right? Like, let me explain it. Tyler Shuck has started 3 games this season. The first game, we give him a pass on that. It was against the LA Rams. That does, like, matchups against the Rams defense, they don't count, right? Obviously not a good game for him or Chris Olave. But again, it's the Saints and the Rams. After that, they got an excellent matchup against Carolina. Carolina defense that actually made Brock Purdy look rather awful, right? So we had a matchup against Carolina defense where Olave had an excellent performance. 5 receptions on 8 targets, over 100 yards and a touchdown. Then this week against Atlanta, it was more of a volume game, 9 receptions on 13 targets for 70 yards in a game that this was actually very encouraging because Tyler Shuck was objectively awful. He was objectively awful, terrible, and despite all that, he still managed to provide Chris Olave with volume. This was good for us to see, that just because Tyler Shuck is struggling does not mean that Chris Olave was struggling. At this point, all we care about is the fact that the exit of Rashid Shaheed has created an aggressive target funnel and no competition for Olave outside of Juwan Johnson. And then we look at the rest of season schedule here. Chef's kiss. I kind of ignored it for a while because, you know, how often do you look at New Orleans? But come on. We've got Miami, Tampa, Carolina, Jets, Tennessee. Yeah, we love this. We are in on Olave. Now we are selling Hunter Henry. We are selling Hunter Henry because he will be very appealing after his Week 12 performance where he bounced back to that Hunter Henry that we saw earlier in the season. He dominated above all other tight ends in this week here. And perhaps the dominance will make people forget that he has been incredibly ineffective since week 5. Like literally week 4 was the last time we saw him with a tight end 1 performance prior to this. Week 4 was the last time we saw him with double-digit fantasy points in half PPR. It is not a coincidence that it happened in this matchup. Cincinnati is objectively awful against tight ends. I mean, they're objectively awful in general, right? But when it comes to tight ends, they are giving up fantasy points at a rapid rate. The tight ends are running wild there. So next week's matchup against the Giants is appealing, right? But we have seen him in multiple appealing matchups, and he did not produce. Now, he might produce in this one, but I am more inclined to believe that moving forward, he's going to look more like the version of Hunter Henry that we've had for the majority of the season here. But again, considering how all the tight end performances were, this is a good time to try and sell him and pawn him off to somebody looking for some trade bait here who is struggling at tight end. And finally, we are holding on Wan'Dale Robinson. Yes, we are holding on Wan'Dale Robinson. Don't let him go. Don't let him go. Last week, prior to week 12, that was a disappointing outing for Robinson. We expected Jameis Winston at quarterback. Big volume increase. Unfortunately, weather was an issue and matchup wasn't ideal as well. So it was a difficult matchup. Winston only threw for 201 yards. But this week he came through in the way that we expect Jameis Winston to come through for us. This is what we know and love. Wan'Dale Robinson was an absolute superstar. I mean, my God, it was crazy. You just kept getting notifications. Wan'Dale Robinson, 9 receptions on 14 targets, 156 yards, and a touchdown against Detroit. Wan'Dale Robinson, once again, was the clear target leader for the Giants in the Giants receiving core. He has been the wide receiver 1 since the loss of Malik Neighbors. That has not been in question at all. And in 5 of the past 6 games, he has had between 9 and 14 fantasy points. The only game where he didn't do that was against Philadelphia. That is very understandable there. So we're looking at Wan'Dale Robinson. We're holding here because, yes, obviously this past game was an outlier courtesy of our boy Jameis Winston, right? And that will come down. That ceiling will come down a bit with Jackson Dart, right? He just does not throw to the level of volume that Jameis does. But trading him away doesn't offer any advantage for you because he is literally ranked outside the top 30 in rest of season rankings at wide receiver. Yet he is literally wide receiver 20 in full PPR. And if you narrow it down to games without Malik Neighbors that, obviously started in week 5, it jumps to wide receiver 18. He is wide receiver 18 with a very solid, consistent floor. He is extremely reliable. And it is important to note that this was during a fairly difficult strength of schedule as well. And over that time period, he only had really 2 good matchups against San Francisco and Chicago. So next up will be New England. They tend to be a little bit pass friendly there. Then the bye week, that is a bummer there. So again, we're holding because a lot of people, they don't often want to buy those guys that have bye weeks there. But then after that, the playoff schedule, this is the real hold here for him. Washington, Minnesota, Vegas, we are holding on to Wan'Dale Robinson. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Terra Time. So make sure that you were tuned in, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff, because we are closing out the fantasy season strong. We've still got waiver wire ads, stashes, live shows with live Q&A where you can ask me any questions that you got, and so much more.